Okay, my presentation is about sport mega events, hosting, and capacity for environmental sustainability. I'm going to examine past experience and Brazilian prospects. Now, the first question that we have to think about when we think about Brazil and sport mega events and the environmental issue is, the first question is, can we think about environmental sustainability without Brazil? And the answer of course is not only we cannot do that, but Brazil is also an essential part in environmental concern related historiography. Now, last year marked the 20-year anniversary from the Rio 92 Sustainable Development Conference. It's so important not to lose sight of the fact that the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development that took place that year, of course, 92, marked the official institutional acceptance of sustainable development. Lest we forget, of course, that 20 years before that, going back to 1972, the United Nations Conference on the Human Environment in Stockholm, the Brazilian delegation famously expressed the following: pollution, they said, the pollution is a sign of progress, and environmentalism is a luxury that only developed countries can afford. So, Rio 92 then was essentially aiming to allay these fears by subscribing to the highly popular abstract notion of sustainable development. Sustainable development essentially suggests that industrial activity and extensive resource use should be allowed as long as environmental side effects are minimized. Now I'm going to continue by posing another question, because we are in a situation now where Brazil is about to host two sport mega events, the most popular sport mega events, FIFA 2014 and Rio Olympics in 2016. So the question here is, where is environmental sustainability placed in relation to these two sport mega events, the most popular sport mega events? And the other question that I can ask is, what can sociology tell us about the capacity for environmental sustainability by sport mega events? And these are the two questions I'm going to engage with in this presentation. Now, starting with the issue of sport mega events and environmental sustainability, the main question, of course, is relates to the last question that I asked. The second question is, what can sociology tell us as a discipline in relation to these two themes? We shouldn't forget that it's important to remember that sociology's study of sport mega events is confronted from the outset with a range of challenges. In fact, trying to make linkages between sport mega events and the environmental problematic appears to accentuate that challenge to insurmountable levels. And let me just break that down. Now, in terms of sport mega events and the environment, for a start, it's important to remember, I'm thinking of Bourdieu. Bourdieu has said that the sociology of sport is something disdained by sociologists and also despised by sports people. Another important issue that I would like to bring in relation to sport mega events, I'm trying to think of the study the seminal study by Maurice Roche. He claims that the study of sport mega events is generally seen as something completely out of the sphere of sociological endeavor. So it is a very challenging to combine these two themes, not very popular themes among sociologists, is a challenging endeavor. Now, to become more specific about this, when it comes to the environment, The truth is that nearly 2 decades after the publication of a very seminal research article by Raymond Murphy, which was entitled "Sociology as if Nature Did Not Matter," attempts to ascribe sociological connection to the environment problematic still raise eyebrows in many sociology departments. And broadly speaking, we should say, the sociological discipline appears to be still conditioned by what is known as a subscription to the human exceptionalist paradigm. Now, the other issue that what happens in the real world, leaving aside sociological theory, theoretical aspects, the truth is that sport mega events today make an immense effort to showcase their environmental credentials. To mention a few examples, the 2006 World Cup finals in Germany and the 2008 Beijing Olympics captured headlines for their greening initiatives. Other example, closely following the German example, South Africa adopted the Green Goal 2010, a 2010 program. While the 2014 FIFA World Cup in Brazil advocates a sustainability strategy that is framed by 13 presidential directives. One of these directives is that to defend the environment and guarantee sustainable development. Similar patterns are evident in the case of Olympic Games hosting and sustainability. In relation to that, an important turning point towards incorporating the green factor in the planning of the Games was the International Olympic Committee, when the International Olympic Committee awarded the 2000 Games to Sydney. And this award was based very much on the environmental sustainability claims that the Sydney Committee made in the bid document that was submitted to the International Olympic Committee. That fact, the fact that the games were awarded, as we were told, based on the environmental claims made by the host city, the prospective host, meant that other successive prospective hosts had to also emulate the example given by Sydney in their bidding, if they want, of course, to increase the chances of being awarded the Games. An important parameter in relation to this is that the same year that Sydney submitted its bid for the Olympics, Beijing also submitted a bid to host the Games. And the story goes as follows. Beijing narrowly lost its bid to host the Games by 2 votes. That's another part of the story. Lost, yes. Beijing back in 1993. And the reason that the Beijing lost, the story goes, is because of Sydney's environmental commitments. For that reason, the promotion of environmental sustainability became an indispensable component in Beijing's second bid to host the Games. And moreover than that, Beijing went beyond that. Although it was not a formal requirement when it submitted its bid, it also, when it ran the 2008 Games, it also applied an OGI study. OGI stands for Olympic Games Impact Study. It was something that was introduced in 2001. And the first host, Summer Olympics host, obliged to conduct an OGI study was the London Olympics. Beijing went beyond that and applied an OGI study, although they didn't have, it was not obliged to do so. Now, continuing along the issue of China, Beijing managing to host applying a second time to host the Games, that very much relates to what I have codified as national pride. The People's Republic of China succeeding to host the Games was a moment of immense national pride. It was an opportunity to showcase the world that China was no longer a pariah state and was ready to take its rightful place as one of the leading countries on earth. On the issue of national pride, I must say that national pride was also an important factor behind the bid to host the Athens 2004 Games. And that's quite straightforward. The Olympics is one of the most important components in the imagined construction of Greek national identity. Moreover, to add to this, as in the case of China, Greece had failed an earlier bid to host the Games. And this is probably the only obvious similarity among these two cases. If you are to engage, though, in a cross-national study of Olympic cause, as I did myself, there is a need to homogenize the calculation methods employed. And although the public exhilaration that marks the announcement that the country has been awarded the Games is not enough on its own for that purpose, it can be a starting point. Indeed, it was the evident exploitation of that national pride, in the Greek case especially, that kick-started my personal interest in this research area. In particular, in relation to that, I published an article with the title Risk versus National Pride. In that article, I discussed how projects perceived to be environmentally harmful by local communities and environmental activists were incorporated in emergency Olympic legislation in order to pacify protest and civil contestation. So that was my initial interest in this particular research area. And of course, that was not the Greek case of the Athens Olympics and preparation of the Athens Olympics was not the only case. Was not the only case where the Olympics and related mega projects associated with the Olympics were seen by environmental actors to be extremely harmful to the environment, and that way mobilized in opposition to the prospects of hosting the Games. So we have a case where environmental actors are mobilizing, in all cases of Olympic Games or preparation for Olympic Games, mobilize against hosting the Olympic Games. The really important issue was that Athens 2004 was the first edition of the Games to follow Sydney 2000. So Sydney 2000 has been marked in Olympics historiography as the first Green Olympics. So the Athens Olympics were the first edition to follow to immediately follow the Sydney Olympics, the first Green Olympics. Now, what we expect from that, since Athens was to follow the Sydney Olympics, the expectation was that Sydney 2000 has rubber stamped the environmental dimension as a necessary requirement for awarding the Games. And also they also rubber stamped the environmental dimension as an important item in their assessment. So the Olympic Games were to be assessed in relation to their environmental credentials after the Sydney Olympics. However, the review of the environmental performance of Athens 2004 by two prominent environmental non-governmental organizations, Greenpeace and the World WWF, demonstrated that this was far from being the case. In particular, Greenpeace claimed that Greece failed to emulate the lessons learned from Sydney 2000, and the Worldwide Fund for Nature, WWF, rated Athens at 0.77 on a scale of 0 to 4. A very extremely low score. Another thing that we need to add, both the IOC and FIFA, as to the World Cup, promote the view that hosting the games can encourage and or accentuate the adoption of environmental sustainability policies by host nations. Now, in relation to that, the following two questions are raised from a sociological perspective in relation to this issue that I just mentioned. The first question is, what makes some nations run successful Green Olympics and others to fail miserably in this direction? What makes some to be like Sydney and some others to be like Athens, basically? The second question is, how can we assess the environmental sustainability legacy of the Games? How do we go about doing this task? Now, these issues were assessed by engaging in a comparative study of 4 recent Olympic host cities and nations. This beginning with Sydney 2000, host of the first Green Summer Olympics, and culminating with London 2012, via Athens 2004 and Beijing 2008. The approach that I adopted can be described as a focused comparison of case studies. It's the same approach that was adopted by Burbach and his colleagues in the 2001 study of different sport mega events in the United States. Now, the 4 Olympic cities selected Olympic cities differ in many respects, although very broadly speaking, all have industrial capacity and access to modern technology. Still, these superficial similarities cannot disguise the vast differences that exist between them and the nations that they represent. For example, Australia and the UK are both advanced industrialized nations. The latter, that is the UK, is a member of the G8, and London is at the epicenter of global capital flows. The differences with Greece, however, are vast differences between Greece and these 2 other nations. Greece is a fully democratized country, an EU member state, and the most developed country in the Balkans. Up to now. May change soon. The country also found itself in a severe economic situation since 2010 that brought to the fore certain structural deficiencies that are still infused with and make any leap to the capacity for environmental sustainability rather uncertain. The interesting thing is that there are certain cultural similarities between the Greek case and the Chinese case. What are the cultural similarities? I'm thinking in particular the role played by the personal connections and the familial in the policy-making context. However, the massive difference is that the People's Republic of China has fully embraced the modernization process since the 1970s. Now, the other thing is that out of the 4 host nations, the UK stands as the nation with the most established environmental credentials. Now, the question is, how do we go about comparing 4 nations with striking socioeconomic and cultural differences? As we're reminded by Preus in his 2004 book, The Economics of Staging the Olympics, in order to make a successful comparison of host countries, it's necessary to homogenize the calculation methods employed to determine the final balance. Now, how do I go about homogenizing the methods? The first thing is that they identify a kind of similarity. The idea that Olympic Games hosting can bring changes that can signify a post-Olympics commitment to environmental sustainability, that idea, appeared to me to encapsulate the essence of the normative claims made by ecological modernization, by the ecological modernization perspective. So basically identify similarity between the aspirations of Olympic Games hosting according to the International Olympic Committee and the ecological modernization perspective. The perspective of the ecological modernization advocates that market-oriented regimes of capital accumulation have the capacity to engage with the environmental problematic and provide sustainable solutions. This is something completely different perspective from other perspectives of environmental sociology, which are very much influenced by the Marxist political economy and are very much polemic towards the idea of having a kind of a form of green capitalism. But ecological modernization is a support of this idea. Now, in case you are not familiar with the ecological modernization perspective, ecological modernization is one of the constituent dimensions of reflexive modernization. And reflexive modernization entered the sociological lexicon through the writings of Ulrich Beck's Risk Society. Now, ecological modernization is the second dimension of reflexive modernization, and that was fleshed out and became known as ecological modernization during the 1990s by a group of sociologists and political scientists in Holland and Germany, two countries which are the pace setters of environmental policies in the European Union. Now, through the engagement with core ecological modernization literature, and the green legacy aspirations of the International Olympic Committee, I single out the following 6 indicators for identifying and testing post-Olympic capacity in environmental sustainability. I'm going to just, there are 6 of them, I'm going to just talk a little bit about 3 or 4 of them. The first indicator is the average annual level of CO2 emissions. How do I measure that? I started with data measuring CO2 emissions at the given host nation since 1990. Why 1990? What was elected? 1990 is the baseline year of the Kyoto Protocol. That's why it was elected. So in appraising a country's status on this indicator, a range of socio-political factors that may have contributed to failures in adopting policies aiming to CO2 emission reduction has been put under the microscope. So I selected an indicator, I examined whether we have a reduction in CO2 emissions since 1990, and then I selected a range of socio-political factors to explain why we have either success or failure in relation to this indicator. The second indicator that I analyzed was the level of environmental consciousness. In this indicator, I examined data from different social surveys to gauge the extent to which the general public in host countries exhibits environmental awareness and concern. Now, I have to have having the interjection here in relation to the 2 case studies of Sydney and Athens. The only item that they both succeeded post-Olympics was to increase the level of of environmental awareness amongst the general public. That was the only success story that came after these games. So that's why I continue to compare them even with the other cases of Beijing and London. The underlying rationale is that the highest that concern is the most likely for the state government to adopt relevant policies. And it is expected that major environmental disasters and adverse economic conditions resulting in job losses and politics of severe austerity may have a significant impact. So it's very interesting to see something like the Eurobarometer, the environmental section of the Eurobarometer, and see, for instance, what is the environmental the concern of the general public for climate change, for instance, or other environmental related issues in Greece, the UK, prior to the economic crisis, prior to 2008, and what is afterwards. So you see what the economic crisis, what impact the economic crisis and the austerity measures that came with it, what impact they have to the general exhibit of environmental concern by the general public in these countries. The other thing is the ratification of international agreements. This indicator assesses the willingness of a given polity to undertake an international commitment over what is a quintessentially global problem. It's very interesting that the Sydney Olympics took place under a government in Australia which was refusing to ratify the Kyoto Agreement. That came later after the election of a Labour government in Australia without promise actually to the general Australian public that they're going to ratify the Kyoto Agreement, they're going to do something about climate change. So the ratification of an international treaty like the Kyoto Protocol can be a major point of political contention that revolves around the issues of economic growth and job creation. Again, I can talk a little bit about this issue and the impact that it had in the politics of these countries. And then we have the designation of sites for protection. I can talk extensively about it, should you require. Implementation of environmental impact assessment procedures. That's the most ambiguous process. Many countries claim that they have an environmental impact assessment framework, but it's the most ambiguous items. It is required by the Olympic Committee. Countries who are hosts are required to engage with this process, but it is so ambiguous that it's very easily malleable, manipulated. The sixth item is environmental non-governmental organization participation in public decision-making, the decision-making processes. Now, this indicator is in direct connection to the degree of environmental consciousness exhibited by the host nation. If there is a high levels of environmental consciousness by the host nation, that means there will be support for environmental non-governmental organizations, and successive governments would invite them in the policy making process. This is the assumption. This is actually what's happening in many countries. Why? They have the expertise of environmental issues, and instead of spending money to an environmental ministry, and it's much more cost effective to invite an environmental organization to join the administration and the policy making process. Now, what I did with the framework of analysis that I employed, I examined each phase of the development of a sport mega event that was proposed by Hiller in his 2000 study. So what we have first is a pre-event phase of the sport mega event in general, in particular the Olympic Games. We have the pre-event phase of International Olympic Committee bidding applications and the preparation to fulfill environmental commitments. What I did in relation to this, I examined different manuals for candidate cities and also the bidding documents from the different candidate cities. In particular, I examined the environmental section of each document. Then we have the event phase. That's where I examine the success and failure to follow the commitments made in these MCCs, in the games. And of course, the last thing is the post-event commitment to environmental sustainability. In order to examine the extent to which the host nations were successful in relation to the post-event commitments to environmental sustainability, we usually need at least 3 years after the Games to start this examination. 3 years of the Games. Now, for the Sydney Olympics, I had 9 years that I examined after hosting the Games, and the Athens Olympics I had 5 years after the game. No, sorry, 6 years after the Games. But the reason I'm saying 3 years is because it relates very much to the London Olympics, and I will explain why we have this specific requirement. Now, I also I employed 2 contrasting hypotheses in my examination. Okay. So the first hypothesis suggests that in the wake of their respective games, which we know were after all awarded to them at least in part on the basis of a range of green claims, okay, one should be able to identify marked signs of environmental improvements in the host nation. The second hypothesis is that to achieve environmental transformation, the effect of hosting the Olympic Games depends more on the supportiveness of domestic political processes. Now, what I found out after I employed all these indicators and these 2 hypotheses, I found out that neither Sydney or Athens managed to achieve a score of 6 out of 6. Actually, as I already said, the only item which was successful was the environmental consciousness, environmental awareness. Development to post-Olympic capacity for environmental sustainability policies were tied to political changes. So in this particular nations, it's very much tied to the election of a socialist government in Greece and a Labour Party in Australia. Any positive projections that were made were tarnished with the acceleration of the economic crisis, particularly in Greece. And as already said, Beijing was the first Olympic host to produce an Olympic Games impact study, although it was not required to do so. Now, and China also scored very well in all 6 indicators. That was the amazing, unexpected finding for many reasons. Now, when it comes to the UK initially showed good potential for complementing its existing game capacity after the Games. Nevertheless, the analysis demonstrated that significant doubts have now been raised over the ability of the country to maintain its positive status in at least half of the identified EM indicators. And the series of this investigation, which follows OG recommendation, will be better assessed in 2015. That is something that the London Olympics in their OG study actually suggests. What they actually says the OG study is that don't have any concrete understanding actually of what assessment of what happened in relation to environmental indicators in relation to the London Olympics. So they actually recommend that claim that they're going to have a better understanding of what happened in 2015. So, but I said the 3 years post-Olympics was actually something that I adopted from the London Olympics. Another important factor that sort of changed things in relation to the London Olympics is that there was a cabinet reshuffle with the climate change skeptic Secretary of State for the Environment, Owen Paterson. Right after the end of the Olympics, they appointed a new climate change environmental minister, which is very much a climate change skeptic. And the other thing that immediately took place after the end of the London Olympics was that there was a relaxing planning restrictions and stimulated growth with mega projects. So they relaxed planning restrictions, for example, in building construction in grid belt areas. And the reason for that was in order to stimulate growth with mega projects, which is not particularly friendly to the environment. Now, in relation to the Brazilian promise, we have FIFA 2014. In relation to FIFA 2014, organizers, stakeholders take concrete steps to make the event more sustainable. That's one of the promises. Also, sustainability initiatives linked to the event inspire other initiatives to be pursued and implemented in Brazil and abroad. This is very much the idea that was promoted by the International Olympic Committee. It's exactly the same idea nowadays promoted by FIFA in their allocating World Games. And now, just to Rio 2016, there was an announcement in October 2010 that Brazil is on track to meet CO2 emissions reduction at a 4-year earlier than promoted. And another important issue in relation to Rio 2016 is that Rio produced the only candidature dossier submitted for the 2016 Olympiad, which went into depth on the compensation systems for greenhouse gases that could be used. So these are very ambitious, clear sustainability, environmental ambition that's promoted by both of these major sport mega events that will take place in Brazil. Now, I don't know what happened here. I have another slide. I had a picture here actually of the stadium in Brasilia that was inaugurated only yesterday or a couple of days ago. Now, the stadium in Brasilia could be the first in the world to be awarded the Platinum LEED seal. LEED stands for Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. Now, that's another encouraging issue about the post-hosting the games, environmental credentials that we may see in relation to the case, the Brazilian case. Now, in the examination of both of these two cases, the FIFA World Cup and the 2016 Olympics, Rio Olympics, we can also examine the 6 indicators. Actually, that's one of my plans, actually, to examine these 6 indicators and in order to assess the post-environmental sustainability capacity of Brazil after the Games. Again, I think that the political, will play will be a major factor, play an important role. But the most important thing that I have noticed is that it appears that a full circle has been made in the Brazilian case since the 1970s, since the case where you have the Brazilian delegates expressing this skepticism about environmental protection. So nowadays in Brazil, the green factor, the environmental factor, further from being an inhibitor to the developmental process, it nowadays is a key part of it in Brazil. So that's the closing remark that we make, and thanks for attending. And if you have any questions, I'm very happy to give you an answer. Thank you.
Alguém tem perguntas, comentários? While they think, let me raise a question. You mentioned that Greenpeace and WWF were engaged in those protests. And we were talking about today during the lunch. You mentioned that, you didn't mention now, but you mentioned to me that protests occurred in all the cases. And so you asked me about the Brazilian one, and I told you I haven't seen, at least yet, any kind of protest. So what kind of...
Publicly, you mean?
But yeah, sure, public protest. I mean demonstrations. So what do you think that happens in this case compared to others that is avoiding protest or riots?
Yeah. You see, I mean, the fact is that all environmental organizations and other environmental-related citizen groups that emerged at the time when there's an announcement of hosting the games by any nation, is that environmental groups have always been monitors of Olympic Games and other mega projects. Now, what's happening nowadays is that they actually, the major environmental groups like Greenpeace and WWF are invited in participating in the organization of the games. That's the difference. Even Greenpeace participated in the Olympic Village in Sydney. It doesn't mean that they were not critical, but they had a claim. In the Greek case, they were completely outside. They were kept outside. Right. Perhaps that's why they were so critical of it. But there were many issues. But that's important. If they were invited from the beginning to participate, WWF to offer their expertise, perhaps they would not have been so critical. Even in the case of China, which has been castigated as being an autocratic regime and so on and so forth, there were environmental organizations, including like WWF, that participated in the organization and planning of the games. It actually, China received an impressive assessment from the United Nations Environmental Program. That's why I said it managed to have a positive score in all 6 of the indicators. So it's very committed in investing in green-related growth in China, which is very impressive because we had a completely different perspective at the time when they were organized, or China submitted its bid for the games, or even if it was given the games. There was very much critical perspectives about the ability to host the games. And the same thing with London. London had very good, the UK had a very good standards, environmental sustainability standards when compared to other European. But the most amazing thing that I found with the London Olympics is, although they had very good standing before the games, in the pre-event and event phase, with the post-event phase immediately after the games, it was as if it was in so much satisfaction in the general public for hosting these fantastic games that they started initiating very certainly detrimental to the environmental issue policies, apart from a range of social policies that very much relate to the austerity because of the economic crisis.
Or at the end?
Sorry?
At the beginning or at the end?
It was towards the beginning that they started initiating these policies, and the most amazing, after the Paralympic Games, which were heralded as a major success, they immediately started, they appointed that new minister, the environment, who's a climate change skeptic. He doesn't believe that it's a human-induced phenomenon. He's part of these people who are claiming that it's not the human factor that is responsible for the climate change. And also, there was all these changes in the planning. And the idea was to stimulate growth and provide employment. But there was very restriction on building in greenbelt sites. That's why you have so much flooding in the UK. It's part of it, because there's so much building in green sites. So the plan was to reduce that now.
Concerning this subject, I read that they are building like a park,
Yeah.
Elizabeth something, that is in London, where the buildings, the main buildings for the Olympics, they will like constructing other types of that will help the environment. I read something like that, but I don't know if it's true. There is a website about it, about this park.
One of the when you think about the environmental issue in relation to the Olympics, most people tend to think about the renovation of the part where the Olympic Games are taking place. In the London case, it was the East London. East London, it was completely an area where it was experiencing a lot of poverty, a lot of derelict sites. So the idea was to rejuvenate this area. Now what happened, it was people obviously who were living there were evicted from these areas. They built new housing, much more expensive, and other people, middle class, upper middle class, were able to occupy this area. And of course the park there, it's absolutely beautiful.
And do you have an idea of what happened to this population?
Yeah, there were many. I don't want to claim that's a conspiratorial story, but it was a point that they were probably removed, go over
To the sea.
yeah, drop it. No, not like that. But we were sent over to the Midlands in England, which, if you know about that, it's a completely. It's not the best area to say that, because it's problematic areas. Experiencing immense poverty after the decline of the industries. They are, and of course, they have mixed populations. And by the time with the economic crisis, you have the rise of the extreme right, racism, all these issues combined. So it's not the best. It's like throwing a match in petrol. That's what it is. So it's not the best idea.
Can you finish?
Yeah.
I would like to ask, when you talk about conscious awareness about the environment, how can you manage to measure it? I mean, before the events and after the events, and how do you know this mentality has changed in practical terms?
Yeah, that's a very
Can
good.
I add something?
Yes, ma'am.
Here in Brazil, before Rio 92, the environment
alright.
conference here, there was in the same year, I think, there was a survey about that, and so everybody in Brazil, 9.950, I don't remember the number, but it was almost everybody was really concerned with the environment. And when you look to the practices, people don't do anything that you can consider sustainable. So when you talk about the way that people think, you are not really accessing the way people act.
Yeah, that's. I mentioned an example of this in the study of about the environmental concern of Southern Europeans, and exactly again in the Eurobarometer study, where during the 90s we were seeing an amazing. The Southern Europeans were seeing an amazing concern about environmental issues in these Eurobarometer studies. So you had things like, especially the Greeks, that was the really funny issue. You had 90% or 95% of the Greeks claiming that they were really concerned about global warming. And then whereas they did a study where asked certain key questions in relation to that. Like that, is gonna melt global warming, like to melt the ice, Anyway, that's his questions, and the answers they were giving were so completely ignorant. They didn't really know what they were saying they were concerned about, because they were completely opposite from the obvious, I will say obvious, obviously not from most of the public, but the majority of them didn't really know why they were concerned about global warming, because they were completely ignorant about it. And obviously, in that sense, when somebody claims, ticks the box in any survey and says, yes, I'm really concerned about that, it doesn't mean that they have a true understanding of what they were concerned about, and it doesn't mean that they take appropriate action. So I mean, I had a whole discussion about this environmental concern. Are environmental concern about global warming, nuclear weapons, so different issues, genetically modified food. How concerned are you about that?
Almost moral issues.
Moral issues. So you will see there are different answers. Okay, so I mean, I selected personally about the environmental awareness. I selected the climate change response, and then of course I had a discussion. I combined it with other responses in the same Eurobarometer. So what we were saying, like climate change, interest, awareness, then concern about a global war, fear of poverty, all these issues. And after the economic crisis, you see the issue of poverty or unemployment were much more important than the issue of climate change. So that's the important thing. So all these are very, very doubtful and can be contested, but I mean that's the thing that what we have available in order to produce this kind of studies.
When you talk about this European barometer,
Eurobarometer, yeah.
What is that exactly? I never heard of it.
It is, you can find online if you just Google Eurobarometer and you go to the European Union website.
It's a research group? No.
It is by the European Commission organizes that. I don't even, when you say research group, it just...
It's a platform, a place where people put things, right?
No, it is a study that's commissioned by the European Commission. And they have different study groups in each of the member states of the European Union. And they are all combined, and they are, I mean, you can find actually, if you check online, you can find individual Eurobarometers per European Union member state as well.
Okay, but they have a focus. I mean, they study environment specifically, or
there are different Eurobarometers. They are special. Actually, you're right. I'm talking about the special Eurobarometer on environmental issues,
okay.
Special Eurobarometer on climate change. There are other special Eurobarometers on these other issues: poverty, unemployment, crime. I think this is but you can find all of them. It's available in the website of the European Union. Right?
Someone else?
Well, I have a question.
Sure.
When you said about the Brazil promise, yeah, you said about the government, the Brazilian government made some promises about environmental to achieve some results in environmental causes. Yes. What are these promises? What are the promises?
Well, the promises in relation to the games. I mean, it is. There is again. They have made this major promises that there's going to be more intensive actually than previous times. There's going to be really respect to the environment, and they're going to minimize the impact or they compensate whatever negative impact the games have in terms of the construction and preparation for the games. They're going to compensate. That's the thing.
Okay.
It's so very. I mean, I can go in more detail, not right now, but I mean, it's something that I'm working on right now to work on the Brazil case. But from what I have seen, and then you can find the bidding documents again online, and you can see there are many parts that they are fairly impressive when you compare to previous Olympic hosts. But this is the time that how things have changed. We have this big debate about climate change. So things have a lot of things have changed, including more technology, environmental friendly technology that's available when compared to the first previous Olympic games. So that's part of it. It's just part of the natural projection of how the games have evolved, perhaps, rather than saying that it's a good country compared to the others. It's just projection of the games. They have evolved like that. But still, the political issue can play again a great role. It depends what's going to be the administration of Brazil, but how the economic crisis around the world, the global economy is going to evolve, and so on and so forth. But Brazil is in a very good situation in terms of economics. It's likely that we're going to see any negativities long after hosting, actually, the Olympic Games, in my view. Nothing.
Another question.
Yeah.
And you said in one of your slides that China was the only host country that produced a Olympic game impact study. Yeah. This study is on it's open, it's on the internet, so it's secret.
No, I don't think it's produced. I mean, I have found. For me, when I started the preparation for the Beijing Olympics, I thought it was very, very impressive that bit by bit they had an OG kind of assessment for every single aspect of the preparation. And what was perhaps, China has every 5 years has a 5-year plan. The last 5-year plan was a concrete commitment to green growth. I mean, if I can finish my study in relation to the previous 5-year plan, it would have been so impressive. It was impressive because of the last 5-year plan that China has produced. Yeah, I may change my view in.
They make themselves up to date to these plans. I mean,
sorry.
They make themselves up to date to the plans.
Yeah, they have. I mean, I don't know if they have understood you right, but they have every 5-year plan. They obviously have a commitment, different commitments in relation to the environmental issue. So for that they have.
It's easy to make a plan and present it to the world. I mean, do they really do it?
Yeah, I mean, the country has been extremely polluted. I mean, it became, with all this economic growth, it became the main producer around the world of anything, what we wear, what we, everything. So, I mean, they have realized that they have to slow down the pace. I do believe that. I mean, they are facing, the country faces immense environmental problems, and whatever comes along with that, like health problems and
like the Soviet Union.
Like the Soviet Union, exactly. Yeah, that's it.
But how they manage to keep this industrial production going? I mean, to sell everything to the world, and still maintain this agenda. I mean, of slow down the impacts.
What was the amazing thing was that you have to go back to the 1970s with Deng Xiaoping, the plan. So I mean the whole process of modernization process, you have to go back then. But they were thinking about it. That was part of the project. That's how far back I have to go. Think about the long-term planning. It was, and that was one impressive when I started, because obviously you don't realize that you have this image, and that was the image that the world had in '93 when they gave the games to Sydney. The image that they had, the world had of China, was the Deng Xiaoping. Oh, sorry. It was a 1989. I wouldn't call it massacre. It was the killing of many young Chinese demonstrators in the
Xiamen.
Yes, yeah. That was the image that they had. And that's why it wasn't so much because Sydney had a very convincing environmental plan. It was mostly that China had a bad image, really bad image at the time. And that's something that came when they beat the second time, came the extreme pollution levels and also the human rights issues that came again. But this time they gave the 2008 Olympics. And again, they were really, really impressive in many respects, in that respect, and the environmental front. I mean, starting the. All right. Any other?
So you very much. It's a
you.
pleasure to have you here. I hope you'll come soon again
Wait,
to the Olympic Games and the World Cup.
if anybody has any tickets for the World Cup, definitely come.